Brandon Thurston from Wrestlenomics is up next, and we're going to follow Brandon with John Pollock from Post Wrestling.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone.
But we can't ignore the math, okay? We can't ignore the data.
Go on Google Trends, type in your name, then type in mine. You're a straight line, I'm a pyramid.
I like the very direct question on that.
Television ratings, downward spiral. Buy rates, plummeting.
The time is now to turn the math around.
Bring in John Pollock and Brandon Thurston for another week. It is Wednesday, November the 29th. Welcome to the program from a very cold, snow-filled Toronto, Ontario, joined by Buffalo's own Brandon Thurston. Are you having snow today?
We had snow today and yesterday. I had to brush off my car for the first time of the season here. It's not really winter yet until supposedly late December, but it always snows in like November or something like that, sometimes even earlier than that in Buffalo, and we do have a little bit on the ground right now.
Well, it was almost so cold that we were going to do this entire show outdoors, like the WWE sent their kickoff panel to do in Chicago this past Saturday. Did you? I don't for a second imagine you watched a minute of the kickoff show, but they put the whole panel outdoors and they looked frigid.
No, I did not watch a second of this. So this was
it
in
looked
where?
So
again?
uncomfortable.
This is in Chicago?
Chicago. Like it's as cold there as it is in our areas of North America. But yes, wow. You could see the breath coming out and was like, I just felt awful for these people that they had to be out there for the entire hour. Thinking maybe they just had to cram in more seats. Can't accommodate the kickoff panel. You guys can do your deal outside.
I could probably pull that off if you wanted to. We could probably do this like on my front porch or something.
You can go ahead, but we will keep this an indoor podcast for the time being. And stopping by indoors with us later on today will be Todd Martin from the Pro Wrestling Torch, co-host of The Fix. I'm very much looking forward to talking to Todd as we will be going through some of the major stories from this week, including the return of Bill Brooks to the WWE this past Saturday night, and then that leading into his show closing address on Monday's episode of Raw, which the numbers just pouring out from the sky this morning. Many people alerted that this was a big deal for the WWE, doing their largest audience since August, third largest 18 to 49 number of the year. And I guess we can start there. The overall impact of CM Punk's return that also generated, Brandon, the most social moment.
Most social. It was a very outgoing moment. This had 1.884 million viewers, so just under 1.9 million viewers. And if we look at one of these charts here to see just how much higher was this than what Raw has been doing normally, this is pretty big. As you mentioned, this is the biggest since the post SummerSlam episode in total viewership, and it's the biggest demo since post WrestleMania. And it's quite a bit higher than where they were doing last year for the same week. But yeah, this is a big rating. Interestingly, if you look at the quarter hours, it was, as Raw goes on, it's a 3-hour slog, and a lot of people tune out before the third hour has completed. And so that the Punk moment was not actually the most viewed quarter hour on this show. The most viewed quarter hour is the first quarter.
Why is CM Punk's return to WWE the name of our show title? This is Randy Orton returns to WWE. I mean, the man is, clearly the draw, right, Brandon?
Yeah, so it's
the first hour. Randy Orton.
Yeah, the first hour was commercial free, but even so, the first quarter hour usually I think is ad free anyway when it comes to Raw. So it's not like you can just say, okay, well there were no ads. Well, there usually isn't an ad in the first quarter hour. So that was the most viewed quarter hour, which is the first quarter hour with Randy Orton, over 2 million viewers. Can't remember the last time Raw did 2 million viewers. There's growth for the Punk quarter. It was up. What do I have it here? It was up 7% in total, 16% in the demo for the Punk quarter hour. But it was, as I said on Twitter, the CM Punk audience retention challenge, as some people did not survive for the CM Punk, but most
a lot of people decided to go to sleep.
Yes, they did.
Well, let me ask, because I always look at this, and this is like a guaranteed pattern, and we kind of are still in the mindset that, the final quarter, that is your main event segment. That is where you put the biggest thing on the show. But if you're looking at this, is it almost a are you somewhat sacrificing a CM Punk return by saving it to the end of the show? Would this be better served that we treat the main event, the biggest segment of the show, for one of the crossover hours? Or is this, you still have to aim to build your audience throughout the whole show? Even like, how many bigger returns can you have than this? And
yeah, I mean, I'm not
this is
opposed
the
to
audience
this,
at the end of 3 hours.
because if your goal is to have the biggest whole show average possible, which I would imagine is the priority, if you put him on first, or if you put him on at 9 o'clock or even 10 o'clock, which is where I believe roughly where Seth Rollins went, then you probably have a lot of people tuning out after, and you probably have a lower whole show average, even if it ends up with the big moment, CM Punk being seen by a few 100,000 less viewers. I think you still end up with a larger whole show average because it drove people to stick around. I would have to look at what the hour-to-hour attrition was relative to what it usually is, but I bet they held up better than they usually do for this show.
When we look at CM Punk, I mean, and we'll probably get into this a little bit, that the Raw rights are aggressively being shopped. Mike Johnson reporting that is where Paul Levesque was this past Monday on a field trip with Nick Khan to Los Angeles. So interesting that Paul Levesque is involved in some way in these talks that, we haven't really seen him linked to in the past.
Well, we saw him with Jeff Bezos at the fashion show, remember?
That's right. I mean, look at that. Paul Levesque, quietly just maneuvering himself into big television rights negotiations. But do you see CM Punk being somebody of value on the SmackDown side? How much do you prioritize SmackDown over this next year? I don't think you can make it a lame duck show if you're WWE, but at the same time, Raw is a clear priority at the moment. And are you putting all of your eggs onto your Monday night property, such as a Punk being back, a Randy Orton being back? How do you balance the show over the next year when you have a deal for one and not for the other?
I think they'll probably, just sort of treat it like they're kind of equal anyway. And maybe, are they going to keep, do you get any indication whether they're going to keep Punk? They're probably going to keep Punk on Raw, right? Because he's supposed to feud with Rollins, and that's where Seth Rollins is, certainly, because he has the title. But I would think, with Punk being there now, I kind of thought of this the night that it happened, and somebody reported that that is how they view it, that having Punk gives them maybe a better entryway into doing a deal with WBD. So I think Punk being there makes it more likely that WBD will take Raw. I wouldn't bet on WBD taking Raw, though, given that AEW is there. But I would think they'll treat it, they're still going to make SmackDown a priority. I think they actually have some discipline now that maybe they didn't have in the past in terms of how they execute creative now with Vince gone. So I think they will be treated relatively equally as they have been.
How did you feel everything came off, promo included, Monday night? Was this a successful return, just in the sense, there was a ton of interest and engagement following Saturday's return that seemed to definitely venture outside of just a pro wrestling story? There seemed to be a lot of attention. Monday's number would suggest that interest. And I guess Monday was, people checking in on the product, and are they going to be hooked based on this return after Monday?
I watched an entire episode of Monday Night Raw.
The whole thing.
This past Monday. Do you know how rare that is?
It's amazing how many people that I speak to that do not watch Raw. It is a very small number, and I can't say I would be one of them too if I didn't have to talk about it afterwards.
I'll never forget the moment I came home on Monday afternoon, and I told my significant other, I'm excited to watch Monday Night Raw tonight. And I watched the entire thing, or at least I had it on the TV while I did other things. I thought thought nothing much of the promo, in terms of I didn't have the reaction that other people did about it feeling, like this was kind of a phony CM Punk. I could see how they feel that way. I watched it and I thought, oh, that was kind of shorter than I expected it to be, which sounds consistent with what you hear later about maybe the Dominic and Randy Orton match went long. I was really curious to see if there would be any veiled shots at AEW or people in AEW, and there wasn't. So I thought, it was fine. Maybe slightly underwhelming, but it was fine. But I do understand the reaction of a lot of people, feeling like, CM Punk saying this is my home, and things like that. I I saw, Triple H retweeted it, and I don't think Triple H is like back there like rubbing his hands, being like, "Yeah, we got him to say this is his home." But it does come off as like, okay, the dog who ran away for 10 years is back, and we've got him back on our lap now, and he's doing as he's told now.
Yeah, it will be an interesting one to watch in terms of the guy that has been so outspoken, and I think you only have to assume that he's going to be asked and requested to be on a Saudi Arabia card next year. Like there is a certain level of, how his unspoken, criticism of the company that he's either going to have to walk back or just ignore that this is, that he's doing a roundabout. And I would state that is kind of par for the course in this industry, that, one person's your opinion one day can very much be changed the next. But I do feel like with the Punk character, one of the features of this individual is that authenticity, that he is connected with his audience, that I think there is going to be some of that pushback more than another performer that would be in the same suit where he's coming back after all these years and, speaking one way and then doing a 180.
Yeah. So there probably won't be a Saudi show until May or so.
That's right. Cause they have the Perth show in February. So we'd be, and then Backlash is France in May, so we'd probably be looking somewhere in that June, second quarter. Yeah.
I have to think that's something that they talked about before they made this deal. I have to think that, they put together some sort of, or if I'm WWE, whether or not I talk to Punk about it, you have to, have plans ready to be like, if he, has issues like he had in AEW, this is how we're going to handle it. If this happens, this is how we're going to handle it. Because it's very much predictable at this point. I'm not saying it's necessarily likely that he's going to get into a fight with somebody, but it's very much predictable that this person may have issues, and we may have to deal with that in a way that we can obviously plan for at this point.
Do you think CM Punk has ever Googled how much trouble can you get in for a tweet in Saudi Arabia? Did he listen to Wrestlenomics a month or two ago when you guys were discussing the problematic tweets in Saudi Arabia?
He's shared some Wrestlenomics charts over the last year or so. Like, would that be an issue? Like some of the tweets that he's said about blood money and things more vulgar than that. Will that be an issue for him to even go to the country? I mean, and it's not like he has to be there. It's not like everybody who's in AEW goes to these shows. It's, do you make the card or not? And he may just not make the card, I suppose.
Yeah. I mean, it is one of the shows where it's pretty much until the most recent. I think the recent one was the first one Brock Lesnar has not been on, but typically it's an all hands on deck show. It'll remain to be seen. I mean, that's only one subject about it, but I mean, this is a grown individual that knows what he is getting into. And the fact that, yes, I have been like, this is not it was interesting at the press conference, the way that Paul Levesque kind of presented it as, if we're not the same people we were 10 years ago, you've got to be, hopefully you're a better person than you were 10 years ago. And it's like, we're not talking 10 years ago. We're talking about like recent past for CM Punk. It is not as though he has just softened his criticism of this company, of the culture, its detrimental impact on his physical and mental health. I think that it's certainly there's a lot there, but that's also part of the intrigue of this audience seeing this individual now back in this system that he had been so critical of.
Yeah, I would guess, if I were to guess now, that maybe he's, made it clear that he doesn't want to do those shows. And I don't see that being a huge issue if they just leave him off those.
Saturday also featured the 3-hour AEW block that went up against the Survivor Series. Did you have two screens up on Saturday?
I watched I think I watched all of Rampage and some of Collision. I don't remember at this point.
Rampage was going head to head with the four outdoorsmen at the kickoff panel. And so Rampage was moved to Saturday night because of NHL coverage on TNT. So from 7 till 8, it did 264,000 viewers, 0.08 in the demo. And then Collision that followed, that was head to head with Survivor Series, 317,000 viewers, 0.09 in the demo, which would be Collision's lowest overall audience in its regular time slot, and continuing the trend of getting annihilated against these WWE NXT premium live events. And pretty much expected that we were going to see Rampage and Collision take major hits this past weekend.
Yeah, I mean, Rampage has been preempted a number of times. This was the lowest Rampage total viewership ever. The demo was not quite as record breaking. It was something like the 4th or the 5th least watched show in the demo in Rampage's history, as well as Collision, somewhere in the 4th or 5th worst range. But total viewership for both of them, the lowest ever. Well, okay, Collision was the lowest ever in the normal time slot, with the exception of the previous week where it went head to head with SmackDown, and it was preempted in that case. But this was the least watched Rampage ever. It's getting hammered by it, and it's surprising. Like, we did not consider this as much, I think, ahead of time, just how often it was going to go against WWE premium live events. And there's another one. There's an NXT coming up, not this coming Saturday, right? But I believe the Saturday after that, December 9th is when that is. Then
December 9th is deadline, and then they get a reprieve until the Rumble. And they just announced the NXT show for February, which they will actually avoid because NXT will do a Sunday night show in February. But I mean, you will still have that same day Australia show, not head to head, but still the same day. And then we're, I guess, clear until WrestleMania. It's been I feel it's certainly, we looked at this, that Saturdays would be tough once college football began. You couple that with the WWE shows. It's really, I think, also broken up Collision just being able to have any sort of momentum. Like, you see where, like, after each successive big show, and maybe some of this is people that are just not becoming regular Collision viewers, but it seems anytime it gets any little bit of momentum, boom, they take a hit against one of these shows, and it just seems as though there's this diminishing returns to the core Collision audience. And a preemption sure doesn't help. A week ago, sending people off of Saturday nights as well. I think the show has been really hamstrung by a number of factors, but the WWE competition has probably been the most severe.
What I've done for our video viewers is just look at the trend for Collision's total viewership since the college football season started. And you can, imagine in your mind, if we just cleared out these instances where it's going against a WWE show, this is still a downward trend for the show. This is still a show that is losing viewership over time over this, now we're almost at the end of November. So that's what, a 3-month window. And it was up in the unopposed shows were in the 400s, even in the 500s. The last time they had an unopposed show, I guess, is back here where it actually got under 400,000 viewers. But we'll see. I mean, some of these that are not that long ago, we're doing over 500. So I guess that's sort of a benchmark to see if they can get back to. But it is a show that is losing viewership, and it is waning, sort of like Rampage did over time.
So there you go. Those are your television numbers. We should also mention SmackDown moving to FS1 last Friday, 789,000 viewers and a 0.24 in the demo. So below that huge FS1 number that they did back when the World Series bumped them to FS1, and Chris Jericho noting, Dynamite wins.
Did he note that?
He did note. Everyone said the sky was falling. Hey, we beat SmackDown on FS1 this week. So take your wins where you can find them. But this was this the lowest FS1? No, there's that New Year's Eve episode that they did that was under 400,000 viewers. But this was, with the exception of that one, this was the least viewed SmackDown on FS1. It was going against 4 college football games on broadcast TV, which is why Fox bumped them to FS1 because they were airing a college football game instead, and the usual ESPN NBA game. So that was a lot, and I don't think it's normal. It's definitely not normal, right, for there to be that much. As I throw myself off the screen there. Okay. Well, we can't lose Brandon here to the ratings abyss. But there you go. Those are your latest numbers that we will get to a little later on. We'll also be discussing this lawsuit that has been filed. WWE UFC merger. We can assume it's going to be undone. They're just going to go their separate ways. This is going to just break this thing whole.
Is that what's going to happen?
This is going to be an AT&T situation, won't it?
No, it's another shareholder lawsuit. I did read it yesterday. It's 70 some odd pages. You can find on Bloomberg's Bloomberg Law website.
A huge Vince McMahon fan that wrote this lawsuit, by the way. I mean,
it was pretty thorough.
It was pretty thorough, but also it's not his fellow board members; it's his cronies. I mean, yes. Like the language used. I mean, it's pretty tipping of the hand.
His
here.
Cronies, George Barrios and Michelle Wilson,
stuffing their pockets.
That's right.
Okay,
They got big bonuses for completing the merger. Do you see Wrestlenomics is cited as a source?
I did see that you were amongst the cited sources in this lawsuit. I mean, that must be a semi-common occurrence now for you. I mean, you are a good go-to for
It's
a
happened
legal
once before,
breakdown.
at least. I don't remember. But then it was for alluding to Stephanie making a comment when she was the co-CEO about advertising and how Vince's, the scandal around Vince had caused advertisers to take what she called a pause in their spending on WWE advertising and sponsorships. So I don't know if you want to get into that more or wait until later, but it was a fascinating read. And I've written a summary of it, which is on WrestleNomics.com free for everybody to read.
Yeah, we'll chat a bit about that with Todd. We do have a super chat here, and you're welcome to send in any questions. Is Punk possibly on a short-term deal? Sports Illustrated only said he was signed past Mania, but details were limited. Is he full-time, and when does he appear next? They have not announced a follow-up appearance, although I'd be very surprised if he's not on Raw next Monday. It seems like he's going to be in pretty much as a regular. And yeah, it's been reported it's a multi-year deal. This is not just some 6-month deal where he's going to be in and out. It seems like it is as long-term a deal as you're going to have for someone that is 45, and you would assume this is probably going to be his last full-time contract if you get that amount of term out of him.
Yeah, I believe it's the Observer reporting it was a 3-year deal, which is mildly surprising. You know, we'd talked about the notion of whether Punk would go to WWE, and maybe it would be safer to make a shorter term commitment to see how it works out for like 6 months or a year or something like that. But no, I believe the Observer report that it is a longer term deal.
So yes, we will continue to chat about CM Punk, the man that, I mean, do you think that the way the timing lines up, I mean, do you think he saw that 44% in this year's Hall of Fame, that, you know what, I got to go for it? How else am I going to make up 16% here? These are my last few years. I only made up 3% over the past year.
Is he going to add to his case? I mean, doing a good rating, he's absolutely contributed to a really good rating this week. I think he's probably a short-term difference maker, right? I think is Raw might do slightly better than what it would otherwise, which we'll have no way of knowing whether it is better otherwise, but it'll contribute to ratings. He'll contribute to some interest. We'll see what happens if people continue to feel, and if a significant number of people continue to feel like, well, this isn't an authentic Punk. This is sort of, he's saying things he doesn't really believe in and stuff like that. Then that will lessen the interest,
I think the risk is very low on WWE's side. I mean, if it works out, great. You add another, key name to the mix. They are not in a situation where it's all
makes WrestleMania more interesting too.
It makes you have all these different programs at your feet that could certainly get you through a multi-year deal with this guy. And if it doesn't, cutting bait is not going to cripple this company, barring some like absolute chaos that brings morale down to some awful low. And I don't think they would let it get to that point. It's like, if they have to cut bait, they'll cut bait. I don't think they're going to, they are in the power position in this dynamic. And maybe that is going to make for an easier way to manage this thing, because both sides know their roles and their dynamic in the relationship. And for Punk, in terms of major league money, this is probably his last chance at one of the two major league companies.
Yeah, I mean, in AEW, the dynamic was definitely different, where he was the biggest fish in the pond. And here in WWE, there are some people who are bigger stars than him, including, Roman Reigns, maybe a few others. He won't be given control of a show where he was clearly having a lot of creative influence and leadership on Collision. But he's got a lot of peers when it comes to star power here, and the leverage that he'll have will be much less, if really that much at all. So yeah, and they can definitely do without him. I have this stark memory of sitting there at a Payback in Pittsburgh the night that he had been fired, and it was announced on TV on Collision that he was fired, and watching this show like immediately as that was happening and being like, there are wrestlers here who are over enough. This doesn't feel like a cold show, this WWE show. This doesn't feel like a cold show that needs like this shot in the arm from this new star. It feels like a show that's pretty secure in the star power that they have and the interest level that they have. And you look at the TV ratings, the attendances, and they're up. You don't really need somebody like this, but it does make it more interesting if you have them. And if he doesn't take away more than he gives.
Does this, the extent of this relationship and how it goes, does this inform you about anything in terms of what you've learned about Paul Levesque in this role, where he is clearly the one that is spearheading creative? He is not answering to Vince McMahon. This is, him and Nick Khan's initiative to bring him back. Do you feel that this at all tells you anything more about Paul Levesque, or is this, to be expected that there's a big star out there and they went out and tried to make a deal?
Yeah, I mean, the Paul Levesque of today is very different than the impression we have of him as an active talent, as a wrestler, right? Where he was more about protecting his own interests. And here, the notion we have is that he's very forgiving and he's willing to work with people who he's had problems with before. And this aligns with, the stories about how he was the one who was instrumental in bringing back Bruno Sammartino, who had tremendous heat with Vince, and getting him to do the Hall of Fame and all that. So, he and maybe, his health issues have, made it easier even to let go of grudges, So I think that's what we'll continue to see, is he's willing to work with people who he doesn't have to be best friends with, or, they don't have to hang out after the show.
It's funny because if not for the heart issue, you could argue that is the program, that like the CM Punk Paul Levesque program, like right. That is, that would have been one of the big programs that you could just add to the list, but very unlikely to be happening given the man's health status. But just before we move on here, also this week, it is the big on sale for Allin at Wembley Stadium. The pre-sale has begun, and then the general on sale is this Friday. The return to Wembley Stadium, that they were very meticulous to make sure that they have Will Ospreay on paper and can advertise. You buy a ticket, you're seeing Will Ospreay. So if this gets off to a very strong advance on Friday, I think there is Will Ospreay's candidacy for his future Hall of Fame status. But I'm certain that some expectations are going to have to be measured. It's a long time until this next show. It's the second time in the market, but it's interesting to see that Tony Khan has gone out to state this will be the only show in England next year. So the idea of going there, doing television, piggybacking off the show, it's like they are concentrating all of the focus onto this big stadium event.
Yeah. Legally, I really can't say more than more about this right now. But
sorry, was this not the time or the place?
Yeah. Did you see the WrestleTix has an early update on the pre-sale?
I have not.
This is from yesterday. 27,349 is what WrestleTix estimated yesterday.
For a pre-sale, I would be very happy with that.
Yeah,
for pre-sale.
That goes over what I would have guessed, I guess, and they're already getting near 30,000, so that's pretty good.
That tells you how strong the brand of Allin and Allin at Wembley means. The fact that and that was the argument of you are putting these tickets on sale, where August is, I mean, it might seem like a lifetime ago in pro wrestling, but it's still very fresh in people's mind of what a spectacle this was, the biggest show in the company's history. And Will Ospreay is certainly not going to hurt people's interest, knowing that he'll be in a featured position on that show as well. I'd be ecstatic with that pre-sale number.
So at the same point, I believe this was the first day of pre-sale, I think, and WrestleTix has it listed here. Here's what the comparisons were last year for this event. After one day of pre-sale, 36,000 was the number last year. And again, this is 27,000. So lower, but you could definitely be more pessimistic about this. The gate at that point was estimated to be 4.7 million. Of course, it ended up being 10 million. So I haven't been looking, but people have been talking about higher ticket prices. So I would think, they could be over that same dollar figure with fewer tickets already.
Well, at this point, we are going to welcome in our guest. But before we do that, we're going to get into the time machine to set the table, because Todd Martin joining us from Pro Wrestling Torch, and with CM Punk's return, I think everyone was a bit surprised to see him back, but Todd Martin was not.
Makes perfect goddamn sense. Brett, if you're saying that CM Punk is not going to come back, WWE because he's annoyed about not wanting to do a match with Triple H after being on the road for years, and he's going to say that I'm never going to step foot in a wrestling ring ever again. And I say, look at Bret Hart, who was screwed by this company, who suffered a stroke, who couldn't do anything anymore, and he came back to do a match in this company. Why the does that not make it clear that anybody is willing to come back if they really like professional wrestling and you give them much time? I don't understand what's hard to figure out about that. Obviously, at some point down the line, CM Punk is going to be interested in coming back to the company. He's going to come back. Why the wouldn't he unless he got injured?
I'm home.
The intro of all intros. Joining us now, Todd Martin, co-host of The Fix over at Pro Wrestling Torch. Todd, you called it 9.5 years ago, and congratulations. It's always great for a bet to come to fruition nearly a decade after you set the terms.
Oh dear, I didn't know you were going to be playing that. I was avoiding the mentions of that whole thing. So, yeah, I mean, what can you say?
Yeah. John sent me that yesterday, and I'm impressed that you censored out many of the words there. Good job.
Yes,
I'm one who believes like the censoring, it makes it sound more impactful than the word.
Yes.
Something I think at times AEW could have learned from, although they have toned it down a bit. But Todd, thank you so much for joining us. We have wanted to have you on for quite some time. I thought this would be a great week to have you on. And let's start on the CM Punk subject itself and how you would categorize the handling of the comeback, including Monday's return and sort of the situation WWE has put themselves in getting back into the Phil Brooks business.
Yeah, first off, yeah, it's a pleasure to chat with you guys. Always is. Yeah, sorry we haven't been able to make this work earlier. There were a few times where we tried to set something up and the timing just didn't work out. Yeah, I mean, I found what they did on Monday in terms of the promo to be kind of bland, not terribly engaging, but I'm also was a little bit dubious of him declaring himself home. I don't really think that's the way he thinks about it. But I think that's by strategy. Clearly, they don't want this to be another big, headache with him throwing stuff out at other companies or, creating more issues for them and headaches. I think the idea was simply reintroduce yourself, make it clear you're here, who you are, and then we'll really get the fireworks started once you start doing head-to-head stuff with Seth Rollins and other parties that you're going to be involved in feuds with. And I think that's the psychology. Now, you can argue CM Punk has always benefited from the sort of larger arc of wrestling in terms of being the anti-authority figure, being the person that says the things that other people don't want to say or are afraid to say. And that he loses a little bit of that by sort of being more just, I'm happy to be here and I'll focus on the storylines. But I mean, I think what he did in AEW, which were just, storyline feuds like the MJF feud were plenty compelling, both in terms of the content of the week-to-week feuds and then the matches themselves. So I think they're betting on the most memorable parts of Punk's return being once he gets into the actual feuds as opposed to just reintroducing himself.
Actually, one of the first thoughts I had when the promo was over was that, well, maybe Tony is telling the truth. Maybe there is a non-disparagement agreement between the two of them, and considering he didn't, give even any veiled allusions to AEW.
Yeah, it's entirely possible that he's concerned about what he's able to say and what he isn't able to say. But you'd figure he'd be able to get something out if he wanted to, and I think that was clearly not the strategy either on his part or on the part of WWE.
What did this tell you, Todd, about the management style of a Paul Levesque, by extension Nick Khan, that are being given the credit for spearheading these talks, and coming at a time when it's not like the case of Hogan, Hall, and Nash coming back in 2002 when the company really did need that shot in the arm. This is not the case for WWE, and yet making this agreement now with Punk when there's an appetite for it, but one that WWE could have just continued going ahead with its business in a pretty good state at the moment.
I mean, it's tough to read that much into it because there's a whole bunch of different undercurrents, both in terms of the way Vince would have handled the situation and the way Hunter handled the situation. in both instances, both Hunter and Vince have proven the interest in making peace with people that they think they can benefit from. And Punk is clearly someone that can bring benefits, at least in the short term. You can raise questions about what the results will be in the long term, but as we saw with the rating on Monday, you can see that he is able to draw on people, and he captures the imagination of wrestling fans like few other performers of the last 25 years or so. So he looks at that and he says, hey, we can we can benefit from that, so let's do it, which is exactly what Vince would have done. You can also sort of look at it from like a competition standpoint, and that bringing him in is a way to to hurt AEW, to bring the contrast between the two companies and to bring in another piece that was part of the AEW, roster and now is no longer part of it. And with Hunter, we haven't seen him be as overt in public about the competition, but there's every indication that behind the scenes he's every bit as much of of a competitor as Vince was, in terms of some of the moves he's made, in terms of some of the head-to-head scheduling things around the same time, and then also the behind the scenes with Tony Khan being and AEW being not at all pleased with the way last year, or was it the year before? It was one of the two, where a number of where Hunter took back over, and a number of parties within AEW all of a sudden started expressing interest about leaving the company, which a lot of people drew the conclusion was because of tampering.
I think as well, when we are looking at the short-term effects for CM Punk, there's certainly going to be that honeymoon phase for the audience, for the company, for Punk as well. Are you looking at this, Todd, as one where each side goes in with certain trepidations about the other, or do you feel that this is going to be a much different relationship this time around, just given the what Punk has been through over the past year, realizing that I'm 45 at this point, and this is probably my last chance at major league money in a major league company? I mean, are you looking at this as a multi-year deal on the table, that this could prove to be one where both sides are different? It's a different relationship than the last.
WWE certainly has to have their trepidations about the situation. I mean, given the way things turned out at the end last time, in terms of, obviously some of the things he said on the podcast with Colt Cabana, and then, of course, the way things fell apart in AEW. So, I mean, they have to be concerned about what type of effect this would have on their company, given their company is doing quite well right now, and they don't need a bunch of, drama behind the scenes like we saw in AEW. From Punk's standpoint, I would imagine he's just sort of very thankful that he's getting the opportunity here. I mean, he has to recognize that if WWE says no here, he doesn't have a lot of comparable options. I mean, I suppose, Impact has tried to get their name in the news by bringing up the idea of him being there. But I mean, that's, it's not like it's not like they're going to expend the money that it would cost to have him as a
PFL, Todd. I mean, they would have been knocking. Don Davis would have been right at his front door.
There you go. They do have the money and they're spending it. But yeah, that I don't know how well he would do in PFL these days, even if there are probably some fighters that are licking their chops at the prospect of that. And New Japan, if he hadn't been signed with WWE, I could imagine him taking an occasional date with New Japan. But by all accounts, New Japan's going to be cutting back on expenses next year, not raising them on the talent side. So that's an issue as well. So I mean, he's getting a great opportunity, even after everything that happened there, and I'd imagine he's just very excited about it. Now, that doesn't mean that everything's going to go smoothly, because you can bring someone in and they can be very grateful at the beginning, and just like CM Punk was in AEW, and then things can still fall apart as familiarity over time breeds contempt. But for now, I would imagine Punk is very happy with with the people in WWE that made the decision to bring him in.
Another thing I was thinking while watching Raw was that there's probably a lot of people like myself I've not watched an entire episode of Raw in a long time. There's probably a lot of people, maybe people who've been watching more of AEW than WWE over the last few years were tuning in. And I wonder if they saw anything that made them feel more excited about WWE, or if they just felt like it was, okay, this is the same WWE that I've disengaged with over the years, and I made the right decision. And then I saw a Punk promo that was like this kind of Homer Punk promo. So I don't know if they did that much to make people who have fallen out with WWE feel like they're excited to come back in. Then again, you do see like it's not like there aren't that many people who are watching both. The impact on Collision ratings when we see when we see Collision go against WPLEs has been pretty strong. So it tells you there's a lot of people who are watching both. But it just I couldn't help but think about like the differences, to what extent there even are differences between WWE and AEW while watching Raw, and if they did anything to make people feel excited about the product.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think that's the argument against taking the approach that they did on Monday, because I know quite a few people that fit in that boat, and I had a few contact me on Monday, and it was 100% not terribly enthusiastic about what they saw. Which I was surprised. I watched the show the day after, but I was surprised by that because Raw has been a better show. And so I was thinking, they're probably going to, have some stuff here that's going to be pretty compelling to try to draw in those people. And I thought it was, it wasn't a bad episode, I didn't think, but I thought it was subpar relative to what they do most weeks. And, the MO typically has been to try to shoot some sort of angle when you've got like a big return of some sort to try to keep those people in, and they didn't really do anything along those lines. So I can totally imagine that the people that were tuning in that may not have seen that much of WWE thinking, I saw that I saw that thing backstage with Truth, and that reminded me of like all those terrible things I hate about Raw, and there wasn't a lot of stuff here that was like super compelling, and so yeah, I'm probably better off not sticking with it, which is too bad, because I mean, I think for a lot of those people that view WWE in a certain light, that the product, I think, is probably more attuned to what they like about wrestling these days than it has been for a while. But WWE dug themselves quite a hole with a lot of those people with, the quality of their programming for, basically a 20-year or so period.
Just one more thing on the promo. Like, certainly the line everyone looks at is like the "I'm home" line. I think most people had like a similar reaction to it. And I wouldn't say it's like a sky is falling reaction to it, but I'm also very cognizant of the fact that like CM Punk has constructed like quite a following of his audience that sees this guy, that through all the pro wrestling BS, that this person comes across as genuine in his convictions, whether you agree with them or don't. And I just wonder, like, that audience that has followed him and sees the photo with Hunter, the "I'm home" line, inevitably this guy is going to be doing Saudi Arabia shows, that if you are somewhat kind of chipping away at what has made CM Punk this ultra unique figure in pro wrestling over the last 2 decades.
Absolutely. Yeah, you hit that in the nail on the head. It's exactly that. You don't want to undercut the CM Punk brand in the way that you frame him coming back. And I don't think any 1 week is going to do that. I think people are going to see the Punk that they know in the coming weeks and months in all likelihood. But yeah, for a reintroduction, that's exactly the risk.
We also wanted to ask you a bit about the thoughts this week. I mean, this has been a long time coming with the Tammy Sitch case, but her sentencing did go down on Monday, and the whole sentencing hearing was broadcast. And the end result is that she has now been sentenced to 17 years in prison, this being a result of the DUI that caused the death of Julian Lasseter in March of last year. Tammy has been in prison since May of last year, so she did have some credit for time served, but she is going to be in prison for close to 2 decades. It's such a tragic story involving Tammy Sitch, and there's the part too of how it got to this point, that there were just so many instances, like just going through the history of her arrests and DUIs, that this individual never should have this innocent victim never should have died in the end of this. And this is sort of just like how far this had to go before the hammer was thrown at her. And it's just an awful story all around.
Yeah, it's a terribly tragic story. Tammy Sitch, someone that, had a lot of things going for her, very attractive, a smart woman, someone that had a lot of charisma, and from a very young age was very successful in a public business, fame, fortune, looks. She had, a lot of things going for her. And, not only did she over time destroy her own life, but she destroyed the lives of others as well. And yeah, as far as the ultimate sentencing finally coming down, I mean, it's hard to feel good about, anybody, at least for me, about anybody sort of being locked up for long periods of time. I think it's just sort of, a sad thing to happen to anyone. But the one sort of positive in a sense is just that, as you allude to, that our justice system and frankly, a lot of justice systems, I don't think take DUIs as seriously as they ought to. I think basically the central issue is, unlike most serious crimes, DUIs don't involve a heightened level of intent, the mens rea, as they call in the criminal law. And there's thus, I think, hesitancy on the part of a lot of state criminal justice systems to really throw the book at people who did not intend to cause harm when they drive drunk and hurt people. But I think that DUIs are often treated with way too light sentences in all sorts of jurisdictions. And this was a counterexample. This was an example of, I think, because of the specifics of the fact that she had showed such recklessness so many times in threatening other people's lives and causing, making the potential for other people to be hurt, made it easier for the judge to say, no, we need to take a stronger stance on this one. And I hear more about this over time. It would take more of a concerted effort, because you'd have to change the laws in a whole bunch of different places in order to have an effect on this. But I do hear more over time about the idea of creating tougher penalties for DUIs, particularly when it comes to injuries to other people. And, maybe this is, part of a slow change in that regard.
So she's sentenced to 17 years in Florida. Do you have a sense of how likely it is that she serves that entire term?
I actually wanted to do more research on this because I'd been told that Florida has all states have different laws when it comes to the amount of time that you have to serve before you're eligible for parole. But Florida, I was told, and again, I haven't confirmed this, but I was told, and I think it was from the hearing though, so I think this is likely true, that you have to serve a higher percentage than a lot of states, which would mean that she would have to serve a longer period of time before she'd be potentially able to get out than she would in other states. And that would be consistent with something I do know is true, which is that Florida, for a variety of reasons, has been able to keep their prison population more in check than some states, which means there's less of a crunch to, just essentially let people go, because there's just overpacked prisons and more people coming, which has been the case in a lot of places, even with the prison industrial complex, what it is.
We also wanted to just quickly talk about this lawsuit as well that the WWE and UFC merger is at the subject of. This is from the Ohio Pension Fund that has launched a complaint over the basically over the whole process that they went through earlier this year, and the idea that Endeavor was the front runner to get this, and that nobody else was given a fair shake at things, with the common denominator being that any of these other cash purchases of WWE would have led to the ouster of Vince McMahon, who was able to retain a significant seat with the Endeavor merger as it went down. Todd, have you had a chance to go over
I sprung this on Todd yesterday, the 70-page filing.
Yeah, sorry. We don't mean to always give homework to our guests, but
yeah, unfortunately, it's been a busy week for me, so I haven't gone through it in detail. But I did quickly skim it, and I understand the basis of the complaint. And this was something that that was discussed back at the time, more in the context actually of when people were speculating about the idea of Saudi Arabia purchasing. But it also applies here that Vince was going to try to steer the purchase towards someone that would keep him in power. Now, as we've seen, the way that the the deal was structured, and in fact he hasn't been able to maintain as much power as a lot of people were expecting he would be able to. But that doesn't change the specifics of the lawsuit. If his intent was to steer the sale towards a less advantageous purchase, then that they've still got a claim there. Now, what makes it difficult for the Ohio Pension Fund is the fact that that this deal was structured differently than other deals that they had potentially looked at. So if you had two deals and both of them were a set financial deal, a certain cash amount, then you could, then if you have evidence that a better deal was on the table, then you present that and there's your basis for your lawsuit. Whereas here, it's more comparing apples and oranges, which makes it more difficult to establish that the deal that they were that Vince was looking at was necessarily a better deal, because he got this deal where if the stock price rises a lot, then they were talking about incredible amounts of money that potentially could have been had. Now the stock price hasn't gone as well as they hoped, but that doesn't mean that they weren't anticipating that it would do better, and I think they were anticipating that it would do significantly better. Now that doesn't mean that they weren't potentially avoiding other deals that might have been just as good or better. And I think the pension fund is likely hoping to get evidence in documents that might suggest that they were not looking very carefully at deals that actually seem pretty good. But this seems difficult for them to prove. Now, we've seen before, and this also might encourage these sorts of lawsuits, that WWE and Vince have settled a number of things in the past few years, when in previous decades Vince had been more reluctant to settle lawsuits against him, for the reasons that it can inspire more lawsuits, because people think, okay, I can get a payment too here, and that may be part of it as well, that they figure, okay, Vince and Endeavor aren't really going to want people to go through the books and go through the records of these transactions, and they'll just give us a payoff, and we can move on, and we'll see if they're receptive to that or not.
Yeah, so just recently they settled the Panini lawsuit. The terms we don't know, but they settled the racial discrimination lawsuit with the former writer, and they made a settlement over the previous shareholder lawsuit that was over whether or not they were going to get a Saudi TV deal. I know there's some money that went back to shareholders for that too.
Yep.
Is it common language, Todd, in a lot of these lawsuits that Vince McMahon's appointed board members would be rather referred to as Vince's cronies? There's some great language in this lawsuit when you have a chance, Todd.
I do enjoy a particularly strongly worded brief. It can be fun to read, and it can be tempting to write.
Yes, this was referred to. Vince McMahon's return to power was his coup de grace as well in this as well. So I would love to speak to the author of this particular lawsuit, because they were McMahon's crony-filled board would later seize on this unequal playing field to pretextually accuse the other bidders of showing less enthusiasm and urgency. And a ton of redactions in this, Brandon. By the way,
especially later on.
Yes.
One of the weird things about reading this is that I figured before I read it, this is probably going to be mostly based on public knowledge, things that have already been filed publicly by WWE at this point. And it is. There's an S4, which is a type of SEC filing that you file, I guess, when you're going to do an M&A transaction or something like that. And that goes through, basically, the W had already filed in May. Here's a long, boring narrative about how we made this deal. And it references a lot of that. But it also references meeting minutes that the board had, which I can't imagine how they got in possession of that. And there's a lot of redactions, apparently, where they're referring to who they believe are the different bidders, which I believe are Liberty Media, Comcast, and there's another one in there. Maybe that's like a private equity or something like that. But that was interesting to go through.
Yeah, I look forward to engaging more with it.
Last thing here before we wrap up, Todd, we would be remiss not to bring up the letters of AEW as they come to their year end. And you look back at 2023. This seems like a very tumultuous period for AEW. They're a big year on the horizon for them with their television negotiations being up. How would you assess this year for AEW? This is, I will fully admit, this is the most loaded of questions to end this interview on. But as you just look at things and do you look at it seems very difficult when you've lost that momentum to regain that momentum. And that seems to be the process that they're in. And we'll see if, CM Punk makes that even a larger gap between the two when it just comes to that cool factor that I think AEW is searching to reclaim.
Yeah, I was debating in my head whether it would be hyperbolic to label it a disaster. And I concluded as you were continuing to set up the question that it would not be hyperbolic to label it a disaster. I think it was a disastrous year for AEW. You can point to highlights of the year. I mean, obviously, Allin was a big success, and I would consider, you're discussing the early sales. I would consider that promising as well for next year. So you can point to that. The pay-per-views have, it does not appear they've gone down as much as I figured they would as they started running more pay-per-views. So that's an encouraging sign that they might be able to make more revenue there without hopefully, creating too many fans that are less invested in the product, which is what happens when you get people ordering fewer pay-per-views at the expense of making that additional money. But when you look at some of the key revenue streams, the pay-per-views overall are still down. The television ratings are down. But the worst is the live attendance, which is down very significantly. And I connect that all to a general feeling amongst the fan base that AEW has lost an identity that it once had, which was sort of the alternative to WWE that you could sort of rally behind that was offering a different type of product. And this was the year that they became much more WWE-like, and not even the WWE that of late that's been a better WWE, but the WWE that people dislike that made them more likely to become AEW fans. And I think for a significant base of people that were looking to AEW as an alternative, a lot of those people have filtered out. And the people that are left are a higher percentage of people that also watch WWE and perceive WWE to be the major league of professional wrestling, which is not a great place to be a secondary brand with a bunch of WWE fans that also watch you, but think of WWE as the bigger product. And then on top of those issues, I look at what to me has just been a total, I was going to say mishandling, but I mean, that implies it's more coming from above. Very much, in my opinion, a destruction of MJF, who started the year as a very hot, very effective heel world champion and ended the year as a floundering, try hard embarrassment of a babyface world champion, in my opinion. And I think that has been a real major problem, that's now sort of your standard bearer, this character that I think is really floundering. And you've set up all these different feuds that it appears you're going to be trying to pay off for quite a while here. And I just don't think that's the way you want to present your product is that character on top in the way that he's acting of late. So, and not even of late, in the medium term as well. So yeah, there's a lot of problems with AEW, and hopefully the tournament they're doing right now will help to move them back towards more of a path they were doing before. I think a G1 round robin style tournament is the sort of presentation that I think a lot of the people that are looking for an alternative like. And hopefully we see a strong tournament that's able to generate some positive momentum going into the next year.
Yeah, I was talking with someone recently who was asking me, if you were, and I agree with with what you said about, and what you've been saying for months, that everybody should be listening to the fix about the identity that AEW doesn't really distinctly have. But I was talking with somebody about, well, what would you do to make AEW a cooler brand, to make it the cool wrestling brand again? And I had some thoughts on that, but I'm wondering, like, what are some things that they could do, even in the immediate term, to fortify what their brand is and to start to undo some of the uncool things that they've become?
I mean, the thing that I would say at the very beginning, well, I mean, two things. One is focus on characters that have a sense of coolness about them. There's a lot of characters on the show that, that people like because they sort of have something amusing about them. They're sort of gimmicky in different ways, and people sort of enjoy the joke about them or whatnot, but there's not a sense of coolness to them. It's sort of, I mean, there's different things going on with the different characters, but it's not a sense of cool. So I'd be looking for characters specifically that if you're a sports fan, if you like wrestling in the past, and you're just looking for sort of like a cool character that you can relate to and that has an edge about them, to emphasize those sorts of characters over the characters that don't have as much of a sense of that. And then the second one is to try to emphasize a positive identity. And you can do that in a number of different ways. There are all sorts of different ways to try to emphasize what you are, but you need to have a sense of what that is. And having a sense of what you are also means having a sense of what you aren't. Like, these are the things we do, these are the things we don't do, and to try to, bottom line it for people. I was sort of thinking about that, how you would sort of frame that. And I was thinking maybe something like, wrestling for wrestling fans, because WWE has sort of moved away from wrestling for years and still is, sports entertainment or whatnot, sort of emphasizing the wrestling component, the sports. It's a term that I think wrestling fans like, and emphasizing that we are for you. We're trying to provide a product that those sorts of fans are going to like. And, there's all sorts of different ways to do it, but it starts with having those conversations, just not even thinking about the storylines, not even thinking about the individual characters, but just thinking abstractly, what sort of show do we want to be? And then discussing what do we like, what do we not like? And at that point, starting to narrow down the sorts of segments that would fit into that show. And I think if you look at most successful wrestling companies over time, and there are exceptions to this, you could describe a certain sort of segment and say that fits into what that promotion does, or no, that doesn't fit into what that promotion does. And if it's just sort of throw everything at the wall, that's okay if you're the company that's viewed as, the hegemon. If you're WWE, if you're the major league, which I don't use to is sort of a way to frame it positively. I'm just sort of trying to describe, descriptively the way people think about it. If you are that, then you can throw all sorts of different things, and it doesn't matter because you define for people what wrestling is. But if you're an alternative, you need to have your own affirmative identity of what you are to distinguish you from the company that people know so much. And so that I think having those conversations would be a positive development, because I don't sense that they're being had.
For more with Todd Martin, you should be listening to The Fix every single week at vip.pwtorch.com. Todd Martin and Wade Keller giving you hours of this award-winning analysis from Todd Martin. Most weeks you get PG Todd, but maybe sometimes TV 14 if a rant so requires it from one Todd Martin. But we definitely have to have you back sometime, Todd. Thank you so much for jumping on with us and doing Brandon's homework as well ahead of time.
Pleasure, guys.
Thanks, Todd.
All right, that was Todd Martin. Always great to chat with Todd, who I think is one of the smartest people out there when it comes to just the structure. I think that can be applied to an AEW in particular. That he can put into a lot of specifics about a lot of the kind of big picture problems that they have, but actually break them down into sort of what are some of the symptoms that can be immediately addressed and that hopefully in time have a long-term effect. But this will be a very interesting year to look back on for AEW and how you just rewind this year and how a Tony Khan assesses it. And it's one thing to hear from him publicly and that everything's perfect, everything's great. But only he and those around him can look and state, hey, this is working, this is not working, and how you apply that. And it's very difficult, I think, to be able to balance all of that in where you're being fed information from so many different directions that there's positive here, there's negative here. And what is ultimately Tony Khan's job is to parse through all of that and understand where his product is and have we grown or decreased in popularity this year.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. We got reports out yesterday that with QT Marshall leaving AEW, it sounds like he felt like AEW was becoming too much like New Japan. So it's been not WWE enough for QT Marshall, or maybe it just more had to do with.
He saw that first stats board for the Continental Classics. Like, we're going to make people count numbers, math.
As I think Lucha Blog pointed out, that was a great PR moment for AEW to hear that it's coming too much like New Japan. But yeah, I think there's a lot of things that they could do, and I don't know that they have the discipline to make them happen. I mean, just be a bit decisive, just be decisive about, like, let's say let's pick 4 people who are, I don't know, under the age of 33 or something like that, and let's go all in on them for 18 months and just stick with that. And these are going to be our people that we're going to create, and maybe not all 4 of them will become big stars, but maybe 1 or 2 of them does. And there's just,
one legend, I would argue. Like, again, I don't care who it is. It's like Sting's retiring, and we have one person in that sort of role, whether it's your Jericho, your Christian, your Edge, Jeff Jarrett. I mean, I don't think Jeff Jarrett would be the number 1 pick of that crop, but nonetheless, it's like all of them together. You can make your arguments, but I do feel it's not even a perception problem. It's also a time allotment issue that all these people require their segments every week. And there's just so many of them as well that I think it's what Todd mentioned. It's like we're trying to cater to everyone. And in doing so, it has lost that specificity that this product had in 2019, that it had a much clearer direction of who its audience was and was hitting that audience in a really sizable way.
Yeah, I think probably what we're describing are these symptoms. This is the end result. This is what we see in the show. But I think it's just something that's become much more systemic to the wrestling business in general, and now has affected AEW in that I think there are just a lot of, just over time, there's become more and more people who worked in WWE who have years or decades of experience in WWE, and they are bringing that vision, that style of pro wrestling to AEW. Everything from production to people who are working as producers to talent, and that is causing the product to become less defined, and less different from WWE, and it's become just a less cool product that still has certain things that you're definitely not going to get from WWE, whether it's a Zack Sabre Jr. and a Bryan Danielson match. Lots of blood. It does have those differentiating factors, but I just see it being a group of people who have become more so with years and decades of experience of WWE, and they think that there's a particular way to do things, which is what WWE's done for the last 20 years. Mind you, it's turned a lot of people off in doing so, but they think that's the one right way to do it. And I think they're they're goldfish, in the water that don't really realize that they're in water. They're creating a WWE-like product, not realizing that it is a WWE-like product, because they think that there's only one way to do it. I had hoped that with Tony Khan being, a newsletter reader and a tape trader, that AEW would be different, because he's clearly somebody who loves wrestling and wrestling other than WWE as well. But it looks like, especially based on his comment about the Continental Classic, if you like sports like wrestling, put your money where your mouth is. It sort of hints that this is something that we're doing on the side. This is not our main thing that we believe in. So clearly he believes in something other than a more sports-like presentation, which I think AEW would be better off trying to be.
If there's one hurdle that when AEW launched that I did not expect to be as prevalent, was the impact of a dominant leader in the industry for close to 2 decades, and the impact that would have on a sizable amount of wrestling fans that have grown up and pretty much absorbed one company. I think, I've just watched so many different types of wrestling, and so have you, but there's still so many that it's the default is like how often we would see something and WWE would never do this or this. And it just became a right and wrong, even as probably a lot of that Venn diagram is overlap of people complaining about a lack of an alternative and seeing an alternative that it somehow, this would never happen in WWE, and that somehow is wrong, instead of couching it that this is different. This is a different presentation of the same form of entertainment. And I think that has been pretty pervasive, not just in the industry, but also outside of fans too, that have just known pretty much one product for 20 years.
And I think it's really common to lean on that. I mean, like in the indies all the time, whenever, shows are being put together or matches being put together, whatever, a lot of times you'd say, okay, we're going to do this thing. And well, that's what WWE does. And there isn't like critical thinking about whether or not that's actually the best thing to do. But because the industry leader does it and they do dominate the world, that must be the best thing to do because it's what they do. And that's one thing to do it on an indie level in front of, small crowds and stuff like that. That's not necessarily trying to be an alternative wrestling brand. But when you're the number 2 global wrestling brand, when your, I believe, reason for existing, among other factors, is because there was a large group of people, fans, who were disenfranchised with what WWE was doing. I think it's extremely important to try to differentiate yourself almost for that sake, because I'm not saying you get rid of the ring because WWE has a ring. No, you keep certain things, but it's really important to be different. And I think there's just a systemic unwillingness to think critically, or I don't think people in wrestling are really taught to think critically, because it's ultimately what happens on television is a work, but you have subjective factors. It's subjective to say whether or not a certain segment was a success. You can always come up with excuses why a terrible segment was actually good. And there's really no real scoreboard other than Wrestlenomics. And even that can be explained, the ratings can be explained away, that, well, it was really because of this reason why that happened. So it's sort of endlessly subjective, and it's really easy. It's really plausible to come up with excuses about, why the economic results are what they are. So it's really hard to be honest with yourself about why things are the way they are, and to take the steps that do create a positive change.
One last thing, just circling back to the lawsuit. Both of us got to go through the entire 72 pages. Was there anything we didn't touch on that jumped out at you in terms of what was laid out there? I mean, the key arguments being made is that there were 3 cash offers for WWE, and it's essentially stating that these 3 companies, one of which we're pretty much confirmed was Liberty Media, and just the notion that these 3 were basically not given the same amount of time for due diligence, that Endeavor pretty much had this from the jump. Like the day they started accepting confidential bids, the next day Endeavor had their offer ready. And from there, it seemed like this was going to be going Endeavor's way, that the others, it was just window dressing to appease by making it feel like an open bidding process.
Yeah, no, the redactions are interesting in terms of, I mean, I strongly believe the one bidder, I'm looking at the filings, one bidder, which is redacted, submitted a cash offer of $95 to $100 per share. I strongly believe that's Liberty Media, because there's also a note in the S4 from May that says they were given tickets to go to a house show in Denver, which is where where Liberty Media headquarters is. So it's not like they went to a big show, where you'd be. It was
a road to WrestleMania house show. I mean, maybe they were.
Nobody goes out of their way to go to a house show, unless it's 20 minutes away from where you work. So I'm pretty sure.
Can you imagine if they got John Malone, like Jelly Roll, on Monday to like shove Dominic or something? They could have got him involved in the. I'm sure they would have got it up to $100 a share if they worked John Malone into it.
That would have been great. And the other. Then there's another one that the redaction is real short, so it makes me think it's an acronym. Submitted a cash offer of $90 to $97 per share, and then another one, which the words Comcast fit neatly under this redaction, offered $76.83, which, my surface level reading of that's a pretty low offer, coming from your leading customer, your partner for Raw and for Peacock, where it makes a lot of sense if they just bought up WWE and they wouldn't have to pay for rising costs and live TV rights fees. Maybe they use that IP in Universal Studios and things like that. my sense is that, maybe Comcast didn't really want to be associated permanently and take it in-house, take WWE and wrestling in-house. So I think they my guess would be that, if I were to speculate, that they just sort of made an offer to make an offer so they can, tell their shareholders they tried and they did their due diligence, but didn't want to make an offer that would actually happen. But the accusation here is that, okay, we had an offer for $95, $100 per share, and we settled for a deal that was something like for $95.66. The S4 goes on to say that that's without synergies, though. With synergies, it was over $100 per share. In any case, they say Vince dismissed these other bidders. The excuse is that, well, they had financing and this didn't require any financing because it was an all stock deal. So that's what's happening there. And now the stock, I believe, is sitting around $78 per share as we speak, and that's at a 1-to-1 conversion with WWE shares.
Yeah, I just see this being a real uphill climb for the pension fund to really make any big inroads here. It just seems to me like it is a perfectly valid argument that the TKO side would have, that yes, there were other cash offers, but we can't just evaluate this deal based on pure cash. What infrastructure was there for these other companies to grow a very specific type of industry that Endeavor has the closest thing to in an experience with the UFC? Look at the valuation of UFC before and after the purchase of Endeavor and the amount of crossover, the synergies that we have. And we were making a deal for the long-term viability of WWE and not just cashing out to the highest bidder. I don't know. If I was TKO, I would not be ready to just settle this to go away. I think this is like, the pension fund would have to make a pretty sizable argument and have some kind of smoking gun beyond just what seems to be speculation that none of these other companies were in the running.
And they're alleging that Vince wanting to stay in power was a big part of this, because allegedly Ari and Vince are friends. So they knew that if they merged the company together, that Ari would allow Vince to stay, which he did.
And had to give up equity for Vince to stay from the original offer.
Yes, which is interesting, right? We can, I guess you can.
We went from like a 57-43 split to a 51-49 split that Ari explained was on the contingency of Vince McMahon being part of.
I'm giving you more equity, Vince, because you're agreeing to stay.
Yes.
I don't know what reason do we have to believe that? Like, are there things that would make it difficult to fabricate that part? I don't know. But the notion is that if they had accepted one of those cash offers, that whoever the buyer would have then owned WWE outright, would have owned Vince's shares. Vince would have no power to stay around. And Vince is around in a seemingly minimal role. He's not involved in creative. He's supposedly involved in making the TV deal, and he is the chairman of TKO's board.
Anyway, it's a case that we will follow. We will see if this continues. Will we get some? Maybe we'll get some unredacted documents. And
if you want just a really thorough summary of the life of Vince McMahon for the last 18 months or so, they did a good job of it.
It's very thorough, like the breakdown of all the sexual misconduct allegations, the Rita Chatterton story. Like, they did do their research here. This was not like some of these cases you'll read and it's just like they are lost trying to piece together pro wrestling, news. But they did a very good job in that sense. So Vince McMahon and his cronies represented well in this lawsuit. But that will bring an end to this week's edition of Pollock and Thurston. We want to thank Todd Martin again for jumping on with us. Again, you can catch the fix at vip.pwtorch.com. Tonight, myself and Wei Ting will be live right after Dynamite. And then on Thursday, over at postwrestlingcafe.com, we are dropping the latest rewind away as we are chatting ECW's December to Dismember 2006. That was purchased by about 90,000 homes. One of the worst WWE/ECW pay-per-views of all time. And we're going to hear some contextual thoughts from one Paul Heyman, both in 2006 before this show and in 2008, 2 years removed from this show. So you can tune into that.
Was he in charge of creative at that time of WWE ECW?
He was, Vince McMahon was overseeing it all, but Paul Heyman was the lead on ECW. Yeah. This pay-per-view happens, and the next day is the blow up, and Paul is sent home, and he doesn't return until Brock Lesnar comes back in 2012. So this is the near point of no return in the Vince McMahon Paul Heyman relationship. So you can catch that on Thursday, and then coming up this Sunday, it is it's a free show this week.
It is a free one.
Everyone should still go to patreon.com/Wrestlenomics. Jump on. It's the first of the month. So get all your Patreon subscriptions up to date, and then catch a free show from Brandon, Chris, and Jesse this coming Sunday, where you'll be chatting Phil Brooks, you'll be chatting lawsuits, and I can only imagine what is going to happen over the next 3 days.
Yeah, that's true. We'll be talking about all those things and whatever news happens between then and now. And it's free for everybody, both in audio and on YouTube Sunday.
Will we get can you give us an update on the Buffalo Bills? Did this surprise you how close they played the Eagles this past weekend, taking them to overtime before losing?
There has not been, I think maybe the Bills did win a blowout, but the Bills have not been blown out. It's, I think Jesse has said that it's incredible how they're able to play to the level of their competition, whether it's the best team in the league or the worst team in the league. It's a close game.
I feel we should have some kind of Patriots Bills Wrestlenomics Bowl this year. I mean, that would be the one to settle all things.
I've heard that the Patriots might be relegated to the XFL at the end of the season, though.
That could be possible. Okay, everybody, thanks for tuning in, and we will speak with you next week, same time and place, Wednesdays, 3 p.m. Eastern time, and we will chat with you then.